Good morning, everyone. We're back for the second opportunity to hear from Judge Tom Frawley about the juvenile courts. You recall that he spoke to us in February about that portion of the juvenile courts that dealt with delinquency issues, so-called criminal cases. Today, we're going to ask Judge Frawley to talk to us about care and neglect type issues, adoption, the maybe softer side, although I'm sure there's plenty of heartbreak under those circumstances with abuse and neglect, but it's more of a focus on the young person, the child being the victim, and on a more positive note. And my only other time in juvenile court was handling an adoption in Jefferson County Juvenile Court, and it was a happy, wonderful thing. So as I say, I'm anxious to hear about the juvenile court on this side of things. And we certainly appreciate you being with us again, Tom.
Happy to be here, Richard. It's always an honor and a pleasure to sit
Thank
with
you.
somebody I spent a whole year living with. We could have a separate session, folks, if you talk Kevin into it, where I can tell you what it's like to live with Richard, and Betty and I can sit here and share stories for you.
Objection, out of order.
Overruled.
So one of the things, Tom, Judge Frawley, that you're going to talk about, of course, is the adoption foster care side of things. And without invading your privacy, could you tell us a little bit about your experience when you lived it out as a foster parent, and then in adoption proceedings and things of that nature for us?
Sure. My wife Ann and I became foster parents, state licensed foster parents in Missouri. Roughly mid-'80s, I believe. I never could track of the number of kids that came through the house. Ann tells me I think we're in the 12 to 15. At one point we had 5 under the age of 8. I can remember when I was still in private practice at this time, and I'd go to the courthouse, and people would say, how many kids do you have in the house? I said, well, when I left, we had 5 or 6 or 2 or whatever the number was. In fact, one of the judges in the city, John Chancellor, God rest his soul, a quality man, died way too young. He had a divorce case that he thought was so bad. He called Ann and said, I got these 2 kids. You need to come down and pick them up. Okay. So Ann trots down, doesn't go through me, he goes directly to my wife. So I come home and there's 2 more kids in the house. I kept telling Ann when we had the 5 kids between 3 and 8 that she kept trying to draw to an inside straight because we didn't have a 6. But anyway, so we had a bunch of kids come through. We've had 3 of the kids that came through adopted. 2 of whom were straight foster children, meaning they came from abuse and neglect. One was drug-exposed parents. One was physically abused, hung over a door and beaten, his arm broken. And the third, for whom Richard is a godparent, was born in the father's waiting room floor. There's a whole story behind Melissa. She came early, she had stopped. And so she was not a true foster child, although she's an adopted daughter. So we did that. Adopted all 3. Johnny came in 79, Crystal came in 80, and Melissa came in 85. So we did the foster parent, and we've done the adoption side. There's a program which we'll talk about here at some point called called CASA. The acronym is CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocate. I knew I could come up with it. And my wife was a CASA and was a supervisor in the CASA program. So we've done that part of the care and protection side. So it's the adoption piece, and I guess the other part we've dealt with, which we're dealing with recently, is, as I think becomes more and more common now, is the 3 children we've adopted had interest in finding their parents. Crystal's parents are oldest are deceased. The middle child, John, has found his mother. We've helped him do that, which is an interesting process. And Melissa, the youngest, there's a website of some kind. If the name may come to me sometime through this, but where you can find your siblings or your parents or whatever, and she's found some half siblings in town.
Interesting.
Which is an interesting dynamic that in long ago was almost impossible because you didn't have all these apps. A and B adoption files were sealed, and so therefore no one knew what was going on.
I don't want to touch your heart too deeply or scratch a wound, but I remember little Joey.
Oh,
Do I have that name right?
yeah, you got Joey. Yeah, that's a good memory. We stayed in contact with Joey. Joey came to us in foster care because his mother was picked up as a passenger in a stolen car, which is a crime it's called the tampering second. Tampering meaning you're riding in a car that's stolen. So she is taken to jail. There's no family to watch Joey. So Joey ends up in foster care. Now you would think that as soon as she got on a bond, which was not hard to do on a tampering second charge, that he would go back. It didn't happen. He was with us for about a year, during which he celebrated a birthday. And if you've ever had a young child, have their first ice cream cone, Joey he ate his from the bottom up. So when it was all over, all he had was ice cream in his hands. He ate the cone, and now he's trying to. So when he left, we stayed in contact with him and his mother, I have Joe's phone on my Rolodex, I guess, to use the old word, Richard. And he comes and goes. Joey's Melissa's age, so he's got to be 34, 35, 36, and that range. And he's got a little one of his own. So he's got his own set of problems, unfortunately. He's got a girlfriend who's got her own set of problems, unfortunately. But yeah, we only had one real baby that didn't stay, and then we had Lori, who was probably 9 or 10, and all she wanted to do was read a book. Very bright, and my wife, being my wife, who Aunt Richard knows well, said, "I don't think that's going to work. You're going to play sports." So here's Lori, who has about as little interest in volleyball as anybody, but Aunt forced her to get exercise. So yeah, it's a very challenging, yet can be very rewarding.
I know one of the warnings I think you've taught me about foster care is just because you're a foster care parent, that's not going to lead to you adopting this child. Disabuse yourself of that.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the issues with Joey, right? Y'all were very attached.
Oh yeah.
That was tough.
It was tough, but it was, yeah. No, if any of your parishioners, or I don't know if that's the right word. I'm a Catholic, so I don't know. But in your congregation, Kevin, is interested in adopting, becoming a foster parent is not a clear road to adoption. It may be, it may not. If you think, and this is the part you're referring to with Joe, if you think after you've had a child in your home, especially a young child, that when the caseworker comes to pick up that child, even though that child is going back to his or her parent, and even though you intellectually totally understand and appreciate the correctness of that move, if you think you're going to have no problem in dealing with that, you're out of your mind. Is it possible you'll end up with a child to adopt? Absolutely. Is it possible? Highly probable that you won't? Absolutely. The more, when Ann and I were doing this, and I think it's still true, you can pick an age, a gender, and race. There are more and more non-white children that are being taken by Caucasian families as foster parents and then adopting. But the more open-minded you are, should you wish to become a foster parent, of age, gender, and race, and also sexual identity in today's world. I digress for a minute. And when you do this, the other thing, when you do work with kids, they are so enlightening at times, and all of a sudden you realize, God, I never thought of that. So I was in juvenile court out in Warren County, and this is a complete digression. I apologize.
You're doing fine.
But you now got, this is the more, I don't want to say fun, because it isn't fun, except you're dealing with kids, and kids are great. So I digress from my digress. Can I do that?
More than once.
If you ask me personally, what was the most rewarding part of this care and protection side of juvenile, the personal side, as opposed to the professional side? I was out in Warren County as a juvenile judge. I won't bore everybody with why. Probably 6 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. And when I retired by age from the state, which was February of 17, they threw me a retirement party, at which 2 of the young women whom I had in foster care came. Didn't have to, never expected it. They came because they appreciated all that we had done. And, you know, in my view, it's done getting better than that. If you can have a kid come to you and say, as an adult, thank you, and that's pretty darn good. Anyway, so that's the first digression. Now I got to remember what the second digression was.
You're doing fine. And
Yeah. Had to do with Joey, I think, wasn't it?
well, it could be. Well, when Joey left, you
Yeah.
had hopes that he could stay,
I think
and
I
it
already-
was difficult.
I think I already talked about that piece.
Okay.
I can't remember the digression.
Well, that's all
My
right.
first digression, I apologize. It'll come to me at some point.
Was it a girl in Warren County?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.
Mhm.
Obviously, Kevin is the youngest person in this room.
Who's
as opposed to 2 guys in their mid-70s trying to remember what day of the week it is. So we're sitting there, and I insisted that the older kids come to court. Everybody, when they started doing juvenile, well, we don't bring the kids to court. I said, well, that's going to change. I mean, it isn't her life, for God's sake. Seems to me they ought to be here, and I've got a good digression for that too. Kevin, remind me. But anyway, so we're sitting there, and it's, I don't know, April or May, early somewhere in the school year, and I say to this young woman, I said, "You gonna go to prom?" "Yeah." I said, "Have you got a guy you're gonna take?" She go, "What makes you think it's gonna be a guy?" Huh? Hadn't thought of that. I said, "Thank you very much." That was an education, politely done, but it was an education I needed to have. I realized I had a child change sexes during the course of his time with me, which was its own issue. So you've got that going on. It's part and parcel. But when you bring the kids to court, so we put them in the middle. They're in the middle, for God's sakes, and it's their life. Why do we all sit around as a bunch of adults and tell these young people, you know, maybe not a 2 or a 3-year-old, but it's really 10 and up maybe, that this is what's going to happen to you, and they don't have any input? Does that make any sense to anybody? So, in a case with, I don't remember her name, but she was a really cool kid, and this was in the city. So, the way my courtroom was set up, I was on the bench, and then looking out at like a long dining room table to the left, and they always sat in the same places. I didn't care, but this is the way they did. First one on the left was the juvenile officer, and the juvenile officer's lawyer, then the children's division worker, then the parents and kids, not parents I should say, and then at the end was the guardian ad litem, who's the lawyer who represents the kids, and a court-appointed special advocate if there was one, and the kids. So we always started to the left. The juvenile officer made his or her spiel, then the children's division made his or her spiel. Kid raised their hand. I got a question. Who is that person sitting down at the end? I said, that's the juvenile officer. I said, no, the other person. Who is that? Well, it's not your case manager. I've never met her. Case manager just given this wonderful story of all of the things she had done for this family. And I have this kid say, I don't even know who that is. So I said, even more important, these kids need to be here. They need to hear what's being said about what's being done for them or not for them. And the story in Warren always was that if we had a big docket, they would negotiate which kids would come, because they knew that the hearing without the kid would be about, with me, would be about 5 minutes. If the kid was there, it'd be at least 20 minutes, because I spent 15 minutes talking to the kid about what was going on in their life, and nothing did really, it was relevant in a tangential way to what we were doing, but it was more interested in what's going on in their lives and what's doing. So I always thought it was important that they knew I gave a damn about what happened to them. And I was said when I left Juvenile, I said I hope that every kid that appeared in front of me on the care and protection side left saying, I got to clean this up, huh? That he gave a damn, that he gave a damn about what happened to me. And then that, if they said that, then I did my job. If they couldn't say that, then I'm not sure I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But
So,
yeah.
getting into the legal side of things a
Why are we
little bit
talking
more.
about that? Why are we talking about the law?
Well, what you're saying, of course, and your personal experiences are most interesting, and I don't want to diminish the importance of that.
No,
But on the care and protection side, what exactly does that mean in the context of being a juvenile judge?
Where it usually starts with it could be a 911 call or hotline call made to the Children's Division by a police officer, by a parent, by almost anybody. Children's Division will then send a hotline worker, what they used to be called, probably still are, out to the house and assess the risk to the child. And depending on the risk, they will either leave the child in the home or remove the child and put the child in foster care. It usually starts out with an emergency foster care position, family, where those are families that are generally there for the really short term, where dirty house. And you say, well, can I take a kid for a dirty house? I can tell you, I had a house in the city. I think people that are our age remember what ant farms were, when you could have a little thing full of sand and ants could build. It was an ant farm. The whole first floor was an ant farm. There was stuff everywhere with just little trails that you could walk through. So you would remove that child, let them clean up their house, or the house was just full of such debris, feces, animal feces, or whatever. So you put the kid in an emergency foster home until they got the house cleaned up. Now you say to yourself, clearly that doesn't happen. Clearly it does happen, folks, where you have animal feces and stuff all over the house, food, kitchen sink full of food 2 weeks old. Anyway, so they would go to emergency foster home. Something more significant in terms of correctability, if you were, if that's a word. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, the child will go into a more traditional, shall we say, foster home. If it's sometimes, unfortunately, it's the child's behavior that brings the child into care, in that the parents didn't have medical insurance or they couldn't afford it. In that case, or the child is too physically aggressive, and that child would then get put in a more structured setting. Mary Grove was one when I was doing it. There's one over in Webster whose name escapes me right now.
Circle of concern?
Yeah, Circle, something like that. Yeah, and so they would be in a very structured foster home. So once it gets child gets removed, there's a petition filed, and there's a temporary custody hearing as to whether the child should remain in care. And basically, that's based solely on the documents, temporary protective custody. And I would say I don't remember not granting that. There may have been one or two. You then have a protective custody hearing, which is within 3 days of the child's removal.
Why the speed, Judge Frawley? Why does it move quickly?
Because you want the child back home, if that's the right thing for the child, as quickly as possible. As I keep that question, because there's in lieu of digressing again, the speed issue is important. So then you have that hearing. If protective custody is granted, you are to have the adjudication, which is the next step, meaning are there enough grounds for long-term removal? That's to be done within 30 days, and a disposition hearing, which is where the child goes, is to be done within 90 days. Let me say, adjudication is were there grounds for the child to be removed, i.e. was the house so filthy the child had to be removed. Disposition is where do I place the child? Might be I place the child back home because during that 90-day window, mom and dad have cleaned up the house, mom and dad have gotten drug treatment, they've gotten cleaned up, dad has moved out, and therefore we think the child is safe with just mom. And so adjudication is the entry, if you will, to long-term involvement, but it's a tough one to win as a parent because it doesn't take a lot to, it's the sort of thing, if I'm gonna, there's either, I know clearly, excuse me, the child should be brought in, I know clearly the child shouldn't, or I'm really not sure, I'm gonna protect the child, which means you're probably gonna be more likely to leave the child.
Can the parents be heard and testify?
Oh yeah, the parents are appointed lawyers. They're present if they show up. They're appointed lawyers if they want one. They can hire lawyers if they wish. Excuse me. So everybody gets a lawyer.
Tom, what does the CASA person do in this context, if anything?
The CASA person is, in every circuit that has one, they handle it differently. The city, which is the one I'm most familiar with, because that's the one that I worked with, there was a guardian ad litem who was a lawyer who was in the CASA program, and then in each case where they had enough volunteers, they would appoint a CASA, which would do the investigation for the lawyer. Then the CASA and the guardian lawyer would appear in court together.
And the guardian ad litem has what function under the law?
To make sure that what is in the best interest of the child is advocated for, which could be different from what the child wants.
So you could have the court, you could have the parents, you could have the child, the juvenile officer, all coming in and advocating their respective positions.
Yes, it could be a full house. So, but most people, particularly the lawyers that don't do much juvenile work, think the adjudication is the place you try your lawsuit. And I think that's wrong. You try your case in disposition. You sort of concede that my clients have messed up, but there's no reason the kids shouldn't be back with them. Here's what they're doing. There's no reason to keep the child in foster care. Assuming that you go through disposition and the child remains in foster care, you ought to have, for the first year, the child's in care hearings every 90 days. Review hearings every 90 days. And then in the second, and after the first year, every 6 months. We did them every 90 days, as long as the child was in care. Why all these hearings?
And why speed?
Speed was basically to get the child as home as quickly as possible, or really permanency. Permanency is what you want to achieve for these kids. And permanency may be back home, preferably, or it may be termination of your parents' rights and adoption. So you want to move these kids to permanency as quickly as you can, not violating or never ignoring the parents' rights, but also trying to work, there was a phrase, I'm going to use the word contingency plan, but there was a legal term for it, where you're working down two paths, one with reunification and with concurrent planning. I think that's what it's, concurrent planning. So your concurrent planning might be guardianship with grandma or whatever. So when I started, before I started, there was no requirement that hearings be held at any timeline. And so in 1999, when I knew I was going in January of 2000, we started working with Speaker Catherine Hanaway, who was in the legislature at the time, about creating not just speedy hearings, but frequent hearings. What you find is with most people, when you have a hearing or when you have anything where you have to report, you have this flurry of activity. And so if mom knew her drug problem was such that we were going to have a hearing every 8 months, she'd get into drug treatment on the 7th month. And during the first 6 months, screw it, I'll do whatever I need to do. So we figured every 90 days it was a little harder to just sort of sit around and do nothing. So Speaker Hanaway was incredibly instrumental in getting legislation passed that we now, this is legislatively directed, what we implemented. We were told by Casey Foundation wanted to do this program starting in 2000 with multiple sites to see if frequent hearings could be held and dockets could be managed. So I know I talked about Catherine Herman in February session, but so I sit down with Catherine and we talk. And
She's a juvenile
she's
officer.
a juvenile officer, and we're told we can't do it. You'll never get this done in a metropolitan area the size of St. Louis. I look at Catherine. Catherine looks at me. I say, "Game on." She says, "Game on." So we took it on, and we got it done with a lot of work from a lot of people. I don't delegate well, but this one I didn't get the chance to delegate because people just took it on themselves. I had incredible staff. All I did was show up. I truly did. I mean, I had staff work their tail ends off, and we got this done. We got the dockets completely under control. We had, I don't know how many kids in foster care when we started, 2,500 maybe, I don't know. Some astronomical number, some had been in there for years. In any event.
What'd you get it down to?
I don't remember, I think 1,200 maybe, something
Wow.
like that, some number. I wasn't number driven, my staff, and I'd say my staff was, I don't mean to say they were, the numbers controlled the thing, but getting it down was an objective measure that we're getting kids to permanency somewhere. So plus, so we got people doing stuff, and to be candid about it, I talk about mom getting her drug treatment. It got the children's division to do what they're supposed to do because they had to make a report every 90 days, and also ferreted out those workers which weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. From my perspective, I got to see the kids every 90 days, so from that standpoint, it was win-win. But it was also important because I could see how the kids were evolving and how they were doing, and the foster parents were always welcome, and they would and I encouraged them to come. They were always, February I told this story about I think it was February with Joey, that I wasn't allowed in the courtroom, and
You were not allowed in the
I
courtroom?
wasn't allowed in the courtroom for his permanency hearing. I was his foster parent. I was a judge, and it was not allowed in the courtroom. And I said in '99 when I was going to jail, that's changing. That's never happening ever again on my watch, never. And so it was like a complete change in culture. Foster parents said, she told the CASAs, the guardians, and all the kids, make sure you tell your foster parents are more than welcome. And they would show up and say, is it really okay if we come in? Absolutely, please. So they would bring family, members. I didn't care, anybody. It takes a village to raise a child, and it really takes a village to raise some of these kids that are in foster care. I didn't care who was there. If they were involved, Kevin, you would have been welcome. Even though he said, well, I miss the pastoral family. I don't care. If you're dealing with this young person, you need to be here.
Did you call upon these people, Tom?
Oh,
for
heck yeah,
insight?
anybody was in the room. I did it very informally. A lot of judges do it, they swear everybody in. I looked at it as kind of a conference, and then if there was going to be a contested issue, we would schedule a hearing at some later date. But this was information gathering, because if your pastor is there, he may or she may hear things that they didn't know. They're helpful with the family, neighbors, siblings of the foster parents. I had one, John Costantino was a renowned psychiatrist here in town, who showed up for one of his kids. Like, wow, psychiatrist comes in for the kids. It's important, damn straight. So opening it up in that way, we got, the village was there for a lot of these kids. And we also found people with whom we could place the child or children. Obviously, one of the goals was to keep siblings together, which was its own problem.
Why was that a problem? in some
Well,
instances.
if you've got 5 kids, between 5 and 12, there's not a lot of families that can take 5 kids on. And these aren't, I remember when Ann and I first started doing foster parenting, they sent us a book. This is pre-internet. This is a book of the kids. And there's 4 siblings that are available, and both parents have been killed in a car crash, so they had no parents around. And I said, why don't we take the 4? And my wife goes, are you insane? She actually said, are you more insane than I thought you were when I married you? But it's, I mean, 4 kids. And the other part, we had the 5 kids, none of them were related to one another, so it was even more chaotic. But anyway, so finding 5 kids who have been living in a situation where there's abuse and neglect going on of one or more, or just generically in the family, it's hard. So it's tough to place them together. Plus you want to keep them with family. Well, grandma might be she might not have a house big enough to take 5. So maybe she only can take 1, and then there's an older sibling, brother, or an uncle. You can take 2. And so you've got them parceled out, which has got its own set of issues. And I think for any of your congregation who are firstborn and they have siblings, the firstborn always believes he or she has some responsibility for the younger siblings. I don't think they really do, but you just seem to think you do. And so it's always somewhat traumatic for the older sibling, or the oldest, not to have direct contact with the younger siblings. And so we always tried to make sure that visits between siblings took place, even if they were in non-relative foster homes. So the hearings were basically a gathering of folks, and I've talked to anybody. And I say always, it's never good to say always, because there's always somebody out there saying, you didn't do that when I had it in front of you. But I would think you could count on the fingers of one hand when I had a foster parent there. I didn't say any you want to say. And sometimes I wish I hadn't asked that question, because it creates a whole new controversy. And legitimately, I don't mean that, but now we thought we were done and we're moving to the next case, and foster mom or foster dad raised something that hasn't been discussed and needs to be dealt with. Obviously, foster parents take on responsibility of visitation. They need to make sure the kids see the mom and dad. We had to do that, and
Could there be resistance by the foster parents?
oh yeah, because the parents, oh, you'll be coming home tomorrow. Oh, we're working real hard. We're working real hard on getting clean. We're working hard on our room, on our house, which was the other reason I wanted the kid in court. I wanted them, and they did at times, call their parents out. That's not happened. Are you telling me this lady down here a guy from foster, the Division of Family Service, they're not telling the truth, Mom? Is that what you're telling me? That you are clean? Are you telling me you're clean today? Well, and you think, you see that happen. That's a pretty wow moment. But yeah, so the kids needed to hear that their parents were doing what they were supposed to be doing. That was a positive. And if they weren't, they needed to hear that the parents were lying to them. And maybe being called out by their kids, or parents seeing their child there and how upset their child is that he or she can't go home, would spur mom and dad to do, or mom or dad to do what they're supposed to do. The other part of the problem with kids is the world we live in now. We have women who have 3 kids by 3 guys. Okay? So maybe one of the guys is a bad guy, but the other 2 guys are fine. Well, shouldn't we if we're going to take the children from mom, all 3, why don't we give the 2 to their fathers that are okay? Well, that means we've now got all 3 kids who were living together separated. 2 guys that don't know one another and don't know where the other child is. Like, let's take the reverse, where you've got a guy who's fathered 3 children by 3 women, and he is a good guy, quote unquote, at least in terms of parenting. And he says, they're all my kids, I'll take all 3 of them. Well, they don't even know one another. This world is very, very different than the 1950s problem for juvenile court. And I'm just giving you 2 real examples. It's funny, as I sit here and talk to you and Kevin about it, all this stuff comes back. As I was sitting last night figuring out, okay, what am I going to talk about and this kind of thing, and the questions that you and I chatted about. and the more I talk about it, the more I realize it is exceedingly complex in terms of how to help these children have a life that has any level of stability. Now, if you put them with their bio dads, at least that's their biological parent, and it's less likely you're going to move them back to mom if dad files his own paternity case or his own motion to modify in the court and gets custody. End of story. But you've now separated 3 kids, or you put 3 kids together that didn't know one another. And so you've got all that going on. And whereas, as I say, if it's no dad show up, and we only got one parent working, but it's very complex to try and minimize the trauma to each child based on trying to do what's in that child's best interest.
Judge Frawley, tell us about how the law recognizes the rights of parents to be parents.
Well,
what's the law tell us or require?
Well, the juvenile officer has to prove their case beyond preponderance of the evidence that whatever is alleged to have occurred happens, and then in disposition to prove beyond preponderance of the evidence that the child should be removed from the home. So, and they have a lawyer, so they have all the rights, if you will, of any person in a civil case. And I think preponderance of the evidence, as I'm sitting here thinking, it may be a higher standard than that on adjudication. Rules of evidence apply, hearsay, with respect to adjudication. On the disposition, which where the child should be, no rules of evidence. It's a freaking free-for-all. You got any? Kevin, you testify. I talked to Joe, who talked to Mary, who talked to Pete. Pete told Mary, who told Joe, told me. Okay, wait a minute, Kevin, you're telling me something 4 people removed. Yep, okay, we'll go ahead. So it's just a free-for-all on what you hear.
Is there a bias by the law in favor of parents, remaining parents?
I think so. I mean, here's what I would say. There's a hierarchy on permanency. As I said, permanency is the ultimate goal. The hierarchy is return to the parents, guardianship, permanent relative placement, adoption, termination of parental rights. So
Well,
if
let me
the
stop
number
you
one,
right there. In an adoption, then, what's the initial step? Parental termination?
well, the initial step would be terminating the parental rights, either because mom and dad have given up the child, as happened with one of mine.
You mean voluntarily or willingly?
Voluntarily, or if it's involuntarily, it would be through this juvenile process where the child was removed. And so if the hierarchy is a permanency is reunification with mom or dad, and I think there's a bias after the child comes in, is that the first step is to work toward reunification. Plus, you have to have grounds for termination, and they're spelled out by statute. And
What are some of those grounds? Neglect?
basically that have the parent's problem, whatever it is. This is a gross simplification. Is beyond repair. It's so heinous and so severe that it just can't be fixed within a reasonable length of time. Dad's in jail. He's got 10 years more in his sentence. Mom's drug problem is 10 years in the making. So it's likely not, and she's still using while the child's in care. So those are the grounds. There's others. One of the grounds for filing, although it's not a grounds to terminate, is the child's been in care for 15 out of the last 22 months. So it gives you some idea if reunification is the first on the hierarchy, and there's a statute talking about 15 out of 22, you're talking about a 15-month window before you can really start looking at the other options. I shouldn't say termination, which is the most severe. Guardianship, the benefit to guardianship is parents' rights aren't terminated. Grandma may not want to adopt, but is willing to do guardianship. Permanent relative placement there's a relative, doesn't want any real legal tie, but is more than happy to take the child. And of course, there's other issues that go with it that are monetary. Grandma's living on a pension, and she needs subsidy. And there's certain, and this may be broader today, but when I was doing it, the number of folks that could qualify for a subsidy as a guardian were very narrow in terms of biological connection. It may be broader today. The fit and willing relative, that may be why they were going to do it, because they get a subsidy, and whereas a guardianship they wouldn't. And there's an adoption subsidy too. And you're not in it for the money. On the other hand, there's expense that comes with these kids.
Tell us about the rights of grandparents. As I suspect our audience includes that important segment of our population.
Well, I mean, they don't have any. They have rights in that if we are to look at the closeness by blood to the child or children that are in care, they certainly have rights beyond foster parents, and they have the right to intervene in a foster care proceeding and have their petition heard for placement with them. So I think they have rights superior. To the general public. Whether their rights are superior to older siblings, or uncles and aunts, I don't remember that there's that discrimination. There could be, I just don't remember that.
If you decide as a judge in the juvenile court to end the care placement of the child and let the child go back home and live with mom and dad, what message might you impart to the parents under those circumstances?
Most times the child goes home on a trial home placement, where we see if mom can do it or dad can do it or they both can do it, whatever it is. And again, we're doing these hearings every 30 days. So they're coming in, every 90 days, I'm sorry. So they're coming in to see me every 90 days, and I Richard, you know me well enough that this won't come as a surprise to you. I treat myself somewhat flippantly in court in a way to try and send a message, such as if I'm sending some kids home, I may bring up that I just had a physical, and because my staff who been with me forever, my deputy would say, "Judge, did they find a heart this time?" "No, Nate, they didn't find a heart this time, but they're going to keep looking." So, folks, if you think I've got a heart, you're wrong. Okay, so we would try and convey the message in a maybe somewhat humorous way, but rather than a preaching way. No disrespect, Kevin. Where I'm saying, you screw this up, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing, but in a way. And my staff did stuff too that they would periodically. I'd see some of the female staff I had talking to the moms, and some of my male staff talking to the dads in an off-the-record discussion.
Warning them about what you might do if they
things they need to do, and well, actually, I don't know what they said definitely, because I would say, so Nate, what were you talking about? Judge, you don't want to know. Okay. Vicki, what were you talking about? Judge, you don't want to know. Okay. So I'm sort of guessing, with some little knowledge maybe of what they were talking about. I don't know what they said, and I thought it was none of my business.
Tom, I take it from hearing you back in February and then today that a juvenile judge has an apparatus, resources, staff.
Yeah.
And when you're in adult court, you have a clerk and you have a bailiff, at least that directly work for you. But juvenile court judges have a whole lot more folks?
Well, actually, yeah. Well, I don't have more people in that. I have a juvenile officer. She or he, in this case she, has a lot of people that work for her. Okay, and the Children's Division is the resource entity. They have, it's going to be money for the kids who are in care to pay for a lot of things that the kids are entitled to.
Is that state or city monies?
It's state money. There's also some organizations in town, and I'm blanking. God, folks, when you get to be 75 and you just get these blank moments, it's just really hard. You know, and it'll come to me probably in July, and I'll tell Richard. But anyway, there's an organization in town that has what's called, they have Little Wishes, and I told every kid that when they came into care that they would get absolutely everything that they're entitled to, that every other kid is. And I wasn't going to listen to the children if somebody wouldn't do it. If you're going to prom, you're going to prom. We're getting the dress. When you graduate, you want a yearbook, you get a yearbook. You get a cap and gown. I'm not listening to that. Well, we don't have any money. I'm not listening to it. It's called a coalition. I can't get the rest of it. But they're marvelous.
Adoptive Care Coalition?
Yes, Kevin.
What was that?
Foster Adoptive Care Coalition. And if you're really good, you'll remember the name of the lady who runs it, who I have on my phone, and I can't come up with her name. Great lady. Anyway, so she was very gracious to pick up my calls because they were frequent. I've got a kid in care. They need money for this or that, but I tried to make sure that every child got what he or she should get if he or she was living at home. What's graduation? Make sure we talked about driver's license, driver's ed, the whole bit. And another part of this piece, which I just mentioned, it makes it even more difficult at times, is the Indian Child Welfare Act. If the child has any type of Indian blood, you have to be cognizant of that. Not a very big problem in Missouri. You can't, if the child is in Missouri and was originally came from Arkansas, you can't just send the child back. You have to work through a compact to make sure that Arkansas is willing to take the child. So it's not as simple. You've got all these other variables involved, and but it's trying to make sure that the kids' lives are as disrupted as little as possible.
What about runaways? Any special challenges there?
And that's the runaway. Yeah, the runaway problem is largely you can't just ship them back to Kansas or Arkansas. You've got to get permission. Now, arguably, they're not care and protection kids. They're more a status offense that we talked about in February. But on the other hand, somebody's got to take care of them while they're here. So usually the division, children's division becomes their quote parent. But we can't ship them back. But yeah, we've had some of those. Obviously, if you can get a hold of the parent, and the parent will come pick them up, we can sort of with a wink and a nod send them home.
And a parent comes in and says, Judge Frawley, in the juvenile court, my child refuses to obey me. He or she is incorrigible. I can't do a thing with her. What can you do to help, if at all?
Well, we can treat them as a status offense and try and put them back home with services. Or we take them into care, foster care, and work to try and put them back home if we can. Oftentimes it's an abbreviated stay in the detention center. Mom relents, the kid promises to behave. So there really is not a lot. I mean, there's a lot of these problems that are real world problems there's just no real answer to. I mean, we've all had, in raising our children, situations where there's just no book or no person that answers the question, and what do you do? And we're a system driven by law, even though I perhaps I don't always let the law I don't let the law drive the train. I follow the law, but I try and let the kid's situation drive the train.
What about this predicament? A parent refuses medical treatment for their child because of religious beliefs. Is that something that the juvenile court might have to grapple with?
Yes, I've had that.
Tell us about it.
I think I had 3 that I had. Well, if mom just walks away from the child, which I've had, and the child's a reasonably healthy child, It's basically a child comes in foster care and off you go. I had 2, maybe 3, where the mom walked away and the child, medical evidence was the child was in incredible pain, would never get better, until one child born with no brain stem. I don't know exactly how that happens, but I know there's a Lord, and I know He has a plan. I sometimes, Kevin, with all due respect, I sometimes wondered, and this was one of them, and the question that I had to deal with was, do I authorize the removal of life support? I had to do that twice. And use
Can you
some
tell
of-
us how you came down on that?
Yeah, I can. The child with no brain stem, I was told it's not something you can surgically connect. It's not something that will repair itself. And the child's never going to be off a machine. And so you balance God's will, and it is God's will, not man's will, against the best interest of this child and the quality of life that you would want. And in that case, I authorized them to terminate life support.
Was it appealed?
No, mom and dad had disappeared. I mean, that was the other piece of what's the parents weren't there. I mean, if the parents are there, it's not, then from my perspective, it's not my call unless, as you say, as was I think the start of your question, where mom and dad want to keep the child alive and the doctors say no. I still think that's a mom and dad decision. I don't think that's a third party decision. And I had one, this is a little off the topic, Munchausen by proxy, which is a mental illness in a parent, which I'm simplifying, is where the parent keeps telling doctors, and doctors plural, that their child has a medical issue, and they doctor shop to keep getting medication for the child, but more importantly, to show their own importance, okay, that I'm really taking care of my child, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a very sad illness in a parent, because the child gets meds they don't need, they get medical treatment they don't need, and I had one of those, and this lady had such a severe case of Munchausen by proxy that by the time we got enough information, the child ultimately died. Mom was prosecuted for murder and was convicted. That wasn't in front of me, but it was in front of, in the adult court. So you have multiple parental issues such as that. I mean, the number of, and have a lot of parents who have they're really mentally unable to take care of a child, but their sexual organs work fine, and they parent a child. Sometimes, and we had one of those where the child had no problems. Mom and dad both had some mental deficiencies, and the child was fine. But then you've got a child at 8 years old parenting his parents. So, but I've had that, and you do the best you can, because it's pretty tough to take the child from the parents when they haven't done anything wrong. That's just who they are. And but it's, there's also the tragedy. You take a child away from a parent there who's about her fifth. I had one child in Jefferson County where I tried a termination of parental rights. It was her 8th child by the same father, and the 8th child was taken away. And what she did was she shopped counties. So she'd have a child in Jefferson County. If that child was taken away, she went to Franklin County, and then she'd go to Warren County. We had one where we took the child, this is mom's 5th or 6th, and she said, "Go ahead, Judge, take the child, just go make me another." So for all of the things you like to think you're doing right, you have people whose response is, well, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And I don't know how, I mean, the birth controls, I mean, we are a free society that we're supposed to be able to exercise our free will. But some of these folks they just keep making babies, and they don't tend to their own issues of whether it's drug treatment or employment and inability to support, who they sleep with. It's very, very, a very difficult problem.
So if people in our audience want to help out with these very difficult problems through the CASA program, I understand they have a website,
They do.
and I take it that you as a juvenile judge, and you would expect your other colleagues who have that job, to respect CASA volunteers, to listen to what they have to say, and to call upon them to do important work?
Your word was expect, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
That
it doesn't
absolutely.
always happen, but you have seen some very good ones, I take it, who made a difference?
No, you've missed my clue. Some of my colleagues don't let them in court,
Oh, I see, excuse me.
so they don't get to have a voice.
That would be a mistake in your view.
It would be beyond a mistake. What I think the CASA's most important work, in my opinion, is advocating for their kid or kiddos outside the courtroom. The kids are in care usually because mom and or dad, one of them may not be around at all, or they're just unengaged, disengaged, whatever. And therefore, nobody goes to the parent-teacher conference. There are a number of obligations that school districts have for kids. What's called a 504 plan, which is a very simplistic. The kid's got ADHD. We just got to make sure that at the end of the day, we look at his or her homework sheet, make sure they got everything written down. Just that simple. Or we have somebody meet the kid at the bus because the kid can't remember where homework is. And then there's what's called an IEP, an individualized education program, where the child has some serious educational deficiencies, may need some out of classroom additional reading or whatever. And if no parent goes to advocate for the child, you've got nobody who has any experience with the child other than the teachers. I'm not disrespecting them and their knowledge of the child. But I've always thought the CASA provides an incredible resource because they're dealing with the child outside of school, spending time with the child, maybe no adult ever has, whether it's going to the pre-pandemic world, the zoo, a movie, or whatever, and meeting the child, spending time with the child, I think, to me, was much more important than what they reported on. And I don't mean that to disrespect their report, but particularly the way we did it is because the way I did it is by the time I got to them, I'd heard from everybody else. A lot of it was repetitive. A lot of it wasn't, but a lot of it was repetitive. And there's those pieces out of the courtroom that the juvenile officer doesn't go to IEP meetings. The children's division worker doesn't go. But somebody come out of an IEP and say, look, I was at an IEP meeting and here's what the school's doing with this young man or young woman. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we've got some things that I can order the division to do because I would order them to do stuff and they said, well, we can't do that. So that's not my problem. So I said, I pay my tax dollars. I said, well, that's not our division, this other. I said, I don't care how you get it done. I pay my tax dollars to the state. I'm not going to have you to give me this, not my job. It's this guy's job over here. You figure it out. I was, my perspective, pretty intolerant of this. We don't do that. Oh, I get calls from their lawyer all the time, who we became friends over time. Good guy. I think he's retired since. You know, Judge, we really can't do that. Why can't you do it? Well, and if they had a good reason, that's fine. I'd back off. But if they said, well, that's just not. That's more on some other division, the Department of Education. So we better figure out how to get it done. And I've dragged them up there. I've dragged people from Jefferson City up to my courtroom. I've dragged people up dragged them even unfair, but I've ordered them up if they wouldn't come voluntarily. Most of them come voluntarily from Department of Mental Health. Come up to tell me why they can't do something, or how they will do, or how they are doing something. I mean, I'm sure that, and I'm not saying I tried to have my name being mentioned and strike fear in the hearts of state employees, but to at least have them understand, it wasn't going to take no, I can't do that as an answer without some explanation. And most of them had they would explain it, and I'd say, okay, that makes sense. Now, how do we get this done? And they would say, Judge, this is what you have to do. Got it, understood, makes sense to me. But I think the CASA program is very good way for the congregants to get involved. But if you're thinking it's going to be fun, you may be successful, but you may have a situation where you're sitting at a table recommending that a parent's rights be terminated, which is probably something you never thought would ever be a question you would be asked.
That's serious stuff,
Yeah,
big
yeah.
time.
Should the mom and dad's rights be terminated?
Can a resident of St. Louis County be, to your knowledge, a CASA volunteer in the city? Or probably so.
I would think so. I don't think there's a geographic boundary on where you work. I think I would say, I don't know how many of your congregation are non-white, but they're really needed. As I always say to the African American kids in front of me, I'm not black. I didn't grow up black, and I'm not going to try and tell you that I understand 80% or 50% or 90% of what's going through in your life. I'm a little bit better now because two of my granddaughters are biracial, but I got a little bit better feel, but not much. And so the more non-white folks we can have who can explain, but have an understanding of African American culture or Latino culture or Bosnian culture is important. I'm learning right now with my grandchildren that we walked into I won't name the name of a fast food restaurant. So we walk in, we sit down. It's up on the near north side, and I sit down. This is in the summer. My youngest granddaughter swims, and so it's clear she's non-white at that point. Now you're pretty well sure she is, but without sun. But with sun, oh man. So anyway, so we sit down, we order milkshakes and some food. Well, the milkshakes never come, and so they never come. So I finally said, "What are milkshakes?" They take it off the bill. So we get out, and both girls say to me, "So what do you think happened, Grandpa?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think of our milkshakes?" "Oh no, you were. It was racially motivated. You're white, all the workers were black, and it was you're being treated like you're not going to get service." Huh? I hadn't thought of that. So, in other words, something growing up black is just different. And if you've got black kids, yes, we as white folks try to understand and appreciate the differences, but it's not the same. And you've got them, particularly if they're going to be with you for a short window, you've got to be very cognizant of that, because you want to do all the right things for them, and maybe you buy them better clothes than they'll ever get with mom and dad, and you've created an expectation now that they expect this, that, or the other thing.
And there you have it, folks, and I think we'll end our session on that note, unless Kevin, anything to ask?
How about LGBTQ foster parents, adoptive parents?
I will tell you the way it was when I was there. I can't, and I think it's better now. Very few foster parents admitted to being anything other than straight. This is my roommate. There was a reluctance, I'll say, at that time, not by me, but by the state, to place children in a gay household. I remember the first family that came in, and I think it was two guys. They're sitting there. They got the kid in between them, I think. And I said, "So you're roommates, huh?" "Well, yeah, we're roommates." I said, "Really? Really?" And they looked at me and I said, "Look, do you both care about this kid?" "Oh yeah." I said, "Then I don't care. Okay, it doesn't bother me. The fact that you two both care about him is all I care about." They would then, if we want to adopt him, would you do it? Absolutely. There were very few of us back in the early 2000s doing gay adoptions. I was doing them. I didn't care. If you care about this kid, I don't care if you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, I don't care. just if you pass the test, well, that probably shows that they're going to get complete. They were beside themselves. I didn't care. If this kid is important to you and you're going to take care of him, I just don't care whether you're gay or straight. I think that's different. I think now you can admit to having being gay and or lesbian. As I said, I had the young lady in Warren educate me on that, and I thanked her multiple times. I don't think that's anymore a limitation on getting kids placed. I say that because toward the end of my 5 years, I remember a lot of guys and gals coming in. It was really clear they were gay, and they didn't try and pass themselves off to me as anything but. It may be because they knew I didn't care. It also, adoptions used to be hard because now you're approving, from somebody's perspective, a gay relationship. So, and my comment was so. I mean, if there's something, if they're good parents, why do we care? I remember I had one of the kids growing up in a gay household, and of course, you know, if you don't know, and I don't pretend to be educated at the level I should be, you wonder whether the kids are gonna become gay because the parents are gay. And I said something, and I don't remember if it was a guy or a gal, said that exactly. So, Judge, are you thinking that because my partner here and I are both gay, that this child's gonna be gay? Yeah, I'm kind of asking the question to myself. He said, "There's no proof to that." I said, "I didn't think there was, but I was, you know, in my own head." And I've had kids say to me, "Yeah, I know they're gay. Why you got to know? I'm just asking you. I don't know." But yeah, I think it's a much more open situation, Kevin. I would hope it is. If it isn't, then shame on us. Would be my comment. Shame on us as a society and as a state.
Well, as you said, Judge, if they're good parents, why do we care?
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the definition of judicial passion here in these last two sessions. If all judges were of this man's temperament and passion, the world would be a better place, especially in juvenile court. And as I always tell people, when I ask them to consider making a presentation, if we record it, it will preserve your legacy for your ancestors.
Ooh.
And
You didn't tell me that.
That's a good thing, my
I
friend.
thought this was like
and I mean it
Snapchat where
sincerely.
it goes away after a certain window of time.
It won't, and it shouldn't. Thank you, stay well, see you the next time.